Hello YouTube viewers and welcome to my channel CCM Drummer. My name is Matthew Jackson. In today's video I'd like to respond to some comments that were made by Michael Card. His comments were made on a podcast. The name of the podcast was entitled How Spiritual Abuse Ruins Worship, podcast season 9. This premiered November 9th, 2023 on the YouTube channel entitled Worship Team Training. And Branon Dempsey is the guy who owns this channel. It's his channel. So he was interviewing Michael Card. And the interview went something like 29 minutes, something like that. At any rate, there is a few things that Michael had said that I would like to respond to, and let me get right into that. Now, what happened was Branon Dempsey, the host of the show, asked Michael a question about, writing songs and leading and singing back in those times when there were restraints on what you can and can't do in terms of music as played in a church, how he dealt with that. Okay, that was the nature of the question. And here is how Michael Card responded to Branon's questions. This is really before the worship movement started. This is the CCM movement, and what happened as a result of the fact that the church wasn't connecting with young people in terms of music and connecting with Scripture. God raised up a bunch of us and we started writing these Jesus songs. It was the Jesus movement. We were Jesus freaks, so we wrote songs about Jesus. Some of them were worship songs and some of them were teaching songs. My calling has primarily been to do a lot of teaching songs, but since that time, the worship movement started. I think it's, in some sense, CCM sort of failed because it didn't have the worship element that it should have had. So the worship music movement started, and now, in some extent, that movement is sort of failed. I don't want to say it failed, but it didn't meet the needs of the church in terms of providing music that allows people to really connect and recognize the worth of God. No matter what we are, humans, what we do is fragile and faulted, but I do think the CCM movement was too much based on people, on personalities, on making people famous, and then unfortunately the worship movement started and it eventually adopted that too, and now we have worship music celebrities. I mean, what is that? I think they got that from us, and that's my fault. That's our fault. That's CCM's fault. End of quote. Now there's a lot to unpack there. That's about 250 words of quotations there I've got to unpack. But let me just say this. My response to Michael Card on this is not so much a response in the spirit of disagreement. I'm not really trying to be combative or disagreeable with Michael Card. I would just like to offer a different perspective because Michael and I have something in common. We were both born in the year of 1957. I was born in January, he was born in April. I too was on the Christian music scene back in the 70s, back when it was Jesus music and how it transformed into CCM and whatnot. So I was there. I have real world experience in this area as well. Obviously not to the extent that Michael Card has. Michael's got 4 GMA Dove Awards, 1 gold album, and he's recorded 38 albums plus 8 compilation albums. So yeah, he's a very prolific recording artist. In addition to that, Michael has had 27 hit songs that made the CCM charts from 1982 to 1995, 14 consecutive years. He had at least 1 song. In some of those years it was 2 or 3, but a total of 27 songs that made the CCM charts and became hits. And Michael Card ranked number 6 in the top 100 CCM artists of the 1980s. So I think that's pretty good for a guy who thinks that he was a second-class citizen in the CCM world. Yeah, Michael actually said that in this video. He said that he thought he was a second-class citizen. So yeah, with that resume, I don't think so, Michael. I think you're much more than second class. But at any rate, before I get into the meat and potatoes of responding to Michael Card's quotes, there's one housekeeping item I want to clarify. When Michael Card, in his response, when he said worship movement, what he meant was groups like Hillsong, Elevation, and Bethel, Matt Redman, Chris Tomlin, and maybe Jeremy Riddle. You know, he was talking about those guys, the more modern day music that's labeled worship in the last 25 years or so. In the late 90s, early 2000s, that's when it all started. That's what he's talking about. Now, from where I was standing during my time in the 70s, you know, because I remember when I was 17 years old, I had a drum set for about a year. I just had my drum set, and I was playing drum set for a year, and the choir director knew that I played drums, and you know, she pulled me aside and played this record for me, and she says, you know, she's making plans to do a musical for Christmas. In this one section of the musical, there was a short drum solo, and she played the drum solo for me on the record player, okay? And so once I heard it, she says, "Do you think you could play that?" And I said, "Yeah, I think I can." So anyway, I came to church and set up my drums, you know, and there's this old guy that was watching me set up my drums, and he goes, "Those are drums." I go, "Yeah, these are drums. Yeah, cool, huh?" He says, "They look pretty loud." I says, "Well, they can be loud, but don't worry, it'll be okay. I'll you know, I won't play too loud in the service." He says, "I hope not. You're not going to play none of that rock and roll, are you?" And I go, "Oh, no, sir. It'll be really soft. You'll like it. I promise." And anyway, so that was so I know something about how music was supposed to be in church back in those days. And you had certain parameters that you had to operate in, okay? And you couldn't go beyond those parameters if you didn't want to get run out of town. And in 1978, I was in Bible school, and I was assigned to a music team. And we had a repertoire of about, I'd say maybe 25 to 30 songs. And we played in churches, we played at youth groups, we played at outdoor rallies, schools, and a lot of different kinds of venues. But when we played in churches, we played more the soft stuff, more the stuff that you would call praise and worship. So when you had the Jesus movement, the Jesus music that came from the Jesus movement really splintered off into 2 different trains on 2 different tracks. One side was the CCM side. It was real modern, contemporary, upbeat, jamming, Then the other side was more the soft side. And we would call that praise and worship. So really, praise and worship was nothing more than a code for saying that music is appropriate for churches, church services. So when we would do church services, we would go to the part of our repertoire that favored the praise and worship side of our repertoire. Then when we did outdoor youth rallies and secular venue events, we would go more to the CCM side. So there was a definitive line between praise and worship and CCM. So I would say that the worship movement that Michael Card is talking about actually started back then. We just had a different name for it. We didn't call it the worship movement. In fact, back then, we weren't really obsessed with the word worship that much. We called it praise and worship music, but when, like the music director of the church was either called the music director or the minister of music. We never called the music director the worship pastor, okay? Or the song leader, the person leading the singing. We called them the song leader. We never called them the worship leader. And we never called the band the worship band or the worship team. We never used those terms. I just thought of myself as a praise drummer, praise musician. In fact, if you were to call me a worship drummer today, I would take offense to that. That would put you on my bad side really fast. I never thought of myself as a worship drummer. I'm a praise drummer. But anyway, so during the 70s and 80s, you had praise and worship, and you had CCM, all right? And even when you went to the Christian bookstores to buy your Christian music, you couldn't buy Christian music on Amazon. You couldn't go to Sound Warehouse. You couldn't go to Barnes & Noble or Borders and buy your music there, okay? You couldn't download them off Spotify or iTunes. Okay, you had to go to a Christian bookstore to buy your Christian music, all right? So you walk into a Christian bookstore, you see the books in one section, you see the trinkets in one section, and then you see the music in another section. You go to the music section, then the music section was subdivided. You had your old-time traditional hymns, all right? Then you had your Southern gospel, you had your gospel, then you had your contemporary CCM, and then you had your praise and worship. So the way the music, Christian music, was marketed and sold back in those days, they recognized praise and worship being different than CCM, all right? So there was that definitive line. Now, in the late 90s, that's when the line between CCM and praise and worship started to dissolve, and the two genres started to morph into one, okay? And there's a logical reason for that. The reason is, by the late 90s, all the establishment Christians from the older generation, we're talking the World War II generation, the silent generation, those guys, some of them have died off or were about to die in the late 90s. So we weren't getting the pushback and the resistance from them as we had been getting in the 70s and 80s, okay? So the musical tastes of the congregation, the people attending church, changed, got more progressive. And so what was acceptable in the CCM market that you only played in CCM venues now became acceptable in churches where it wasn't before. That's the reason. Now, the CCM, the classic CCM of the 70s and 80s, doesn't exist anymore. That's what my channel is dedicated to, by the way. When I do drum covers, I like to cover the CCM classics. When I think of CCM, I think of CCM of the 70s and 80s. I don't think of the late 90s. I don't think of that, what they call worship music, okay? So I don't get into that. So that's how I see it. As I see, you had two different trains on two separate tracks, and then in the late 90s, those two trains on two tracks merged and became one. Now, a lot of the conclusions that Michael Card and also Branon Dempsey arrived at, I pretty much agree with. In terms of how worship music has been commercialized, and now they're putting on shows, and you see a lot of lights and fog and crazy stuff, and I totally detest drummers playing inside of enclosed drum booths, and I don't know how Mike and Branon would feel about that, but there's a lot of things about today's contemporary church music that I find objectionable, that I don't particularly like. But I've come full circle. Back when I was 17 years old in 1974, I was the new kid on the block challenging the establishment, okay? Now I'm 68 years old, and now I'm the old guy. Me and Michael Card, we're the old guard, and now we're the establishment being challenged by the newer generation, the Gen Zers and the millennials, So we've come full circle, but this is nothing new. If you know who Charles Wesley is, Charles Wesley did the same thing in his time when he wrote his hymns in the 1700s. Those hymns were on the cutting edge and faced a lot of resistance against the establishment of his day. So in a way, Charles Wesley was the CCM of his day, okay? So this is nothing new, all right. So anyway, let me look over my notes. Yeah, I don't think it's like it's anybody's fault or CCM having failed. It's just that, times have changed. The audiences have changed. And a lot of your CCM artists, when they were writing their songs, they did not have church services in mind when they were writing their songs. Like when Barry McGuire came out with Cosmic Cowboy in 1978, he wasn't thinking, this would be a good song for church that they could put in their music set when they do their church service on Sunday morning. Any music director that would put Cosmic Cowboy in their music set on a Sunday morning service probably would have been ran out of town. It wouldn't have worked, all right? So groups like Resurrection Band, which was a heavy metal Christian band of the 70s, when they wrote their songs and composed and produced their albums, they did not have church people in mind. That was not their intended audience that they were trying to reach. Larry Norman was trying to reach a bunch of hippies, all right? In the 80s, you had a heavy metal Christian band called Stryper. Same thing. They did not have church in mind. So this praise and worship, or worship, whatever you want to call it, all right, that's not what they had in mind. They wanted to reach the people who didn't go to church. So it depends on who your audience focus is. And so the audience focus changed as Christian music changed. So that's all I've got to say about that. I could ramble on and on and on about this subject. But in closing, I want to show you a video clip that lasts a minute and a half. Now, I did mention that a gentleman by the name of Branon Dempsey, who has the channel Worship Team Training. Branon Dempsey and I go back a ways. Back in 2003 and 2004, I played drums for Branon Dempsey when he was a music director at this one church. And I played on his praise team. He was a very good praise team leader. He's a very good song leader, and I learned a lot playing with him. He's very knowledgeable in the dynamics of a praise team and how the instrumentation interacts with each other and how you interact with the audience. Learned a lot from him. One principle I learned from him was match the moment. And but anyway, here is a video clip. I'm going to close out the video by showing you this video clip of me playing drums in the praise band that was led by Branon Dempsey. Sit back and enjoy.